Hey everyone, the St. George election this year is incredibly important. Go to votestg.com to see who's running and what they stand for, or visit us at our voter booth at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, or down in the park.
Because I think there's a big conversation about what can the local government do, right, to solve affordable housing, right? Because I think this has been a talking point with city council members, but even at the state level and things like that is, they're trying to almost regulate their way into affordable housing. But I take the point of what you just made too, is that we need to increase revenue. We need to lead with revenues. Like how do we get people more money to be able to afford and stay here, right? Not necessarily. And this is tough too, because even Jeff and I put the voter booth up at the Dixie High School's game on Friday, and I had a couple of guys come and they were talking to me, and they kept talking about the common man and how the government isn't doing anything to support the common man. And I don't disagree that that feeling is valid. Like there's valid feelings to that, is feeling like, well, if I don't have this, technical skill set, I didn't go to Harvard, or I didn't, I'm not tech savvy, where does that leave me? And it's an unfortunate part of time and societies and how they grow. But at the same token, we can't, it doesn't seem to me like there's a place for, if you're not going to increase your skill set and want to learn and grow, there's going to be places for you to to continue to be supported. So there, at some level, there's this support for a labor force, an unskilled labor force, right? And creating environments for that. But at the same time, a focus on how do we continue to drive, education and build an environment, a business environment. Where do you see, what could we be doing differently than what we're doing right now to help encourage that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, we need a diverse economy. So we need all of that. And so we need technical skills, we need, apprenticeships, we need all those types of things, because that's not going away. In fact, even with AI, that's putting more of a challenge on knowledge workers than it is,
unskilled or low skill worker.
Yeah, in terms of like they're highly skilled in their professions. Yeah. And we need all that. So we need a diverse economy. We need to diversify for sure. That allows us to be sustainable through market changes. We also, I think you're bringing up a really good point. It's like we need to be able to trust our skill sets and the tool set that we have to adjust and evolve as the world economy and our society evolves. We need to be able to trust our ability to do that. If we just put our head in the sand and say, I'm only going to keep this one specific skill set, people will out innovate you, because innovation's moving faster and faster. And so I think that's kind of like my general foundation, how I think about it. Now there's no question that government, local economy or local government has a huge role to play. It doesn't mean that it's kind of, they're going to drive everything and push it, but they can set the table, and government has a unique perspective of having a longer term view. They can,
and that's kind of their role should be to kind of look long. Right?
Is not very good at the long term view.
Yeah, because they're trying to make revenue, right?
Yeah,
they're trying to hit a
good
profit
at the near term, and so government can play a role and say, okay, these are strategic areas that we want to invest in. So I think a good example is like Kansas City. It took them about a decade, but they wanted to create a startup ecosystem, and now it's this thriving startup ecosystem. And they did a few things. The government actually created an investment fund through a bond to invest in early startups. That might be a little extreme for us here, but there was a lot of things they did to actually build up a more advanced kind of startup technology educated ecosystem.
Hey Rick, why? I mean, you mentioned it might be a little bit extreme for here. What do you mean by that? Like what?
It seems like our community is fiscal responsibility is really important to us, and being fiscally conservative, and doing a community bond to invest in a risky startup is risky. There's no question about it. And we might be a little bit more prudent on where we want to place our our tax dollars. We could do it that way, but maybe we might be more open to the idea of investing in high-speed internet, fiber optic, that infrastructure that benefits everybody, or quality of life things, like still investing in our recreation, park services, that kind of stuff. That attracts really good talent. Building maybe our downtown environment that's focused around food, restaurants, farm-to-table experiences, that attracts talent here. So we might find ourselves in our community more interested in investing in some of those things that have a broader impact that's not just focused on the startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because we can get investment. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the state, but it can. The state there, if you run it properly, you can actually make a huge return.
Yeah.
In the state of Utah, they have a Utah Innovation Fund now that they just launched. I can't remember how big, 15, 20 million, to invest in startups that are associated with the public universities.
Well, and so like this is where, you start to see two globes like crashing into each other, right? Because I take a perspective of, I get the perspective that a government is like a business, right? In a sense, because it has shareholders, it has expectations that the citizens are, I'm hiring these people to do this job, and there's some clear expectations, right? So there's some simplicity in saying the government is like a business, and at the same time, the role of the government isn't necessarily to make a profit, right? Where a business is in it to make a profit for its investors and shareholders and or to solve a problem, right? There's like a specific, customer that they're trying to service, right? And then they know whether it's at a large margin or a small margin, that it's something that they can stay consistent, throughout a period of time. In government, it's a role of protecting, right? There's this utility of saying, okay, we need to mitigate risk. Like in my mind, I think of government as like, hey, this is like our safety net. This is the thing that we're supposed to, it's a tried and true thing that we can have a reliance on. We could expect this thing to always happen, right? It doesn't necessarily always have to be innovating, but it does have to show up. My water needs to turn on. The electricity's got to go on. The roads can't have holes in them, right? Like, there's these, and especially now as a first world country versus like, I watch all these videos of like Ghana, and like, it's just mind blowing to me that we live in a time to where we live like we live. And then in the exact same time, it could be like somebody was living 250, 300 years ago, like where they barely have electricity at all, right? If they have electricity, right? And then if they do have electricity, it's like a single light bulb inside their house, right? Like that's it. And that's, to me, that's just this stark gap between these two worlds that we live in that era. And so coming back around with like what the expectation with government is, you said setting the table, and Adam Snow talked about that a little bit when I had him on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, is having the government set the table and then allowing the public in the private sector, the private sector and the business sector to come up with these funds.
That's right. Yeah.
Which I like that there's some collaboration with.
Yeah, and public-private partnerships are awesome.
Yeah.
They work really well. Like right now, Utah Tech University has this whole innovation campus they're going to be building, and they've strategically focused on 3 industry clusters. So this is a role government, public institutions play that have a huge impact on what the future of our community looks like. So those 3 clusters are desert tech. So you'll see solar, desalination, those type of things, genomics, and I think the third one is sports science. And that builds on existing skill sets we have here, and also problems we have unique insights on. And so, but they're problems that are global problems. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
The city's role in this could be around loosening or creating like sandboxes to innovate around these areas. So maybe I'll step away from those industry clusters and think about like autonomous flying vehicles. There's heavy regulations around that, and it's really difficult. An interesting comparable is Austin, Texas, when autonomous driving and technology started coming to play, came out of Boston and San Francisco. Austin, Texas actually has the most amount of data and insights around autonomous driving vehicles because that city set loosened regulations to allow it to happen. So all these startups started moving there and attracting that talent. And so that's a strategic long-term view that city took to say, we want to attract this type of talent here. We could do the same thing here, because when we see this emerging ecosystem around autonomous flying vehicles, I haven't really seen a community that's kind of loosened regulations around that, but we could do that. But
also thinking about a community that could benefit from, because we have a geology and a geography that really bodes well for saying, hey, it's hard to get around.
That's right.
We talked about the subway. Yeah. You're the one that destroyed my subway plans. I was like, man, I feel like we should do subway. But thinking about like public transportation, right? But like getting people around in our town, we have a ton of challenges, right? We have groundwater that disrupts going down, right? But then it also we have hills. Just hills after hills after hills, right? We got to go around them, building roads, and then the way the sun just wreaks havoc on basically everything, right?
Well, this is what's great about not always jumping on the newest innovations all the time. You can be strategic about that, but as new innovations like flying vehicles happen, now we don't have to build a subway system. It's way cheaper, and everybody this government doesn't necessarily have to invest in that massive infrastructure. You buy your own flying vehicle or autonomous driving car or whatever the future might look like.